The next topic we're moving into is talking about arsenic and toxic metals. And not that I would ever want to equate arsenic and toxic metals with particular or any Tory politician, but this is an extremely scary story that's coming out of the US, especially given the inference that's coming out of the Conservative government in relation to trade deals, and specifically in this instance with the US, and how they have found high levels of toxic metals, and I say arsenic, lead, cadmium, and mercury. In some cases, up to 200% higher. Sorry, no. Up to, is it 200%? I can't remember now, basically, but it's extremely high levels of arsenic that are much, much higher than what you would normally expect to find in some foods. Now, I think the question probably needs to be asked, would we or should we ever normally expect to find any toxic metals in our food? And I'm sure that the food industry would give us a scientific rationale as to why they end up finding themselves there. So let's accept that. But what we then have to challenge is, okay, if there's a normal level, which is believed to be completely non-affecting our morbidity and our health, but we find ourselves in a situation where there's extremely high levels coming from specific companies. But of course, the other issue you've got is baby food. So we're talking not here just about, I don't know, an adult walking into a shop and buying something, like a sausage roll or something for themselves, which is their own personal choice. We're talking about baby food where the individual in this instance has no choice because it's imposed upon them by their parents or carers. And the actual company that has been located in the United States is called, get this, Happy Baby. Happy Baby. So what they seem to be doing, Tom, is they seem to be creating this positive label in terms of, happy baby. And yet, when you look into the detail, the chances are that that baby growing up to be a happy young person or adult are reduced considerably. Why are they reduced considerably? Because the biological effects are devastating, resulting in neurological conditions, cancers, heart disease, and many osteoporosis, many other side effects that can affect them in terms of their long-term health. So obviously the question is, why are we allowing this? Why do these food agencies in the United States, why they've done nothing for so long, even though they know this is occurring? And one of the things it got me thinking about is, if the Americans have an insurance-based healthcare system, and if that insurance-based healthcare system is very much primed towards the idea of maximizing profits, how do you maximize profits, Tom, within healthcare? Well, ultimately, what you have to do is make the population unhealthy. You have to make the population want to seek health care, because that is the way in which the insurance companies will maximize their income. So if people want to say, well, that's absolutely rubbish, what evidence have you got for that? Well, I suppose at the end of the day, it's about logical thought. On the one hand, private healthcare, which many people argue we shouldn't have, it should be taxpayers, it should be maximizing the health of the country, it should be ensuring that as many people as possible can go from cradle to grave, and the gap between the two is long. And while you're going through that process of living your life, that you experience as few illnesses as possible. Yet in a system that's dependent upon profit, the argument surely is reversed. They have no incentive for a whole population to be largely healthy if it means that the amount of money that they have coming in is significantly reduced. So a lot of people may be cynically saying that actually the correspondence, the relationship that exists between the insurance companies and the major corporations that provide and produce food are probably in themselves not very healthy either.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right, Jason. I mean, you've highlighted all sorts of enormous issues, you know, in America, but obviously due to trade deals that we very much need to be aware of for here. I mean, who knows whether health insurance companies in America are you know, deliberately promoting things that are unhealthy. But of course, when they're, as you highlight, when they're ruthless, and which they are, and when their entire modus operandi is based on profit, not health, then I wouldn't put anything past them. I wouldn't put it past them, for example, for health insurance company lobbyists to also lobby for things relating to food standards, to not be high, pollution, air pollution, things like that, water pollution. Wouldn't be at all surprised if they were lobbying for freeing up companies that pollute the environment from regulation, from you know, too much regulation. Yeah, you know, there's probably a link between those different types of lobbyists that are all helping each other to maximise the profits in those industries.
And of course, they're employed. You're absolutely right, Tom. They're employed because they are successful lobbyists. They command huge, huge fees because what they've done in the past has allowed them to sometimes get around legislation, help create legislation, help persuade politicians to come on board at the detriment of the population they're supposed to be serving. Yeah. And effectively, what we have now is a potential for the UK to be getting in bed with the food standards agencies in the United States, to be accepting their level of measurement of what is and what isn't healthy, as opposed to ours. And this goes back, I think, to one of the quotes that came out of the 1980s about the UK becoming, or seeking to become, the 51st state of America. Well, this will give a lot more credibility to that argument 40 years on-ish, if our negotiation with the United States leads to babies having a lot more arsenic in their food or mercury in their food, and the population as a whole consuming into their, you know, into their bodies, into their biologies, chemicals that we haven't been able to evolve quickly enough in order to create immunity to. So even if in the longer term, higher levels of arsenic don't detrimentally affect humanity, let's say in 500 years' time, in the short to medium term it will, because our bodies will have to go through that process of adjustment in order to compensate for toxic metals that they haven't experienced before.
Yeah. And what's of obvious concern, and it's a project fear issue, isn't it? That
yes.
As a result of Brexit, you know, we're entering into trade agreements with other countries. Australia and America in particular have been cited regularly in terms of standards, and we're looking at I think three things that got labelled as project fear, and the government have absolutely lied to the public about: food standards, environmental protections, and workers' rights. Those are the three issues where people that were keen to remain in the European Union raised as issues that if we left the European Union, and particularly under a Conservative government, and under a Conservative government that are clearly very intent on striking large trade deals with America and allowing American corporations to take over whole swathes of our country, including public services, including the NHS. People were arguing there are concerns about food standards, about environmental protections, about workers' rights. And of course, the Conservatives constantly lied and said, we will keep the standards as they currently are, or they will be even better. We will be free to make them even better. And of course, they just lied about that. You know, it was no one apart from Conservative voters ever believed them. And of course, you know, and labelled those concerns as project fear. And now, of course, almost on a daily or at least weekly basis, we hear about details of trade deals. And of course, sometimes we're not hearing about them because they're all in secret. But when they are leaked, when we do hear about those details, we find that food standards are going to be lower, that environmental protections are going to be dropped and are going to be lower, and workers' rights could well be lowered or infringed in some way, because that maximises profits for the owners of industry. So huge concerns, and you know, so we've chlorine washed chickens and hormone injected beef, and you know, arsenic in baby food. It was all labelled Project Fear, and now it's, you know, now it's a reality. If we want trade deals with these countries, we've got to accept their standards, which include those things. Yes. And yeah, I mean, on the plus side, hopefully it's going to make a huge amount, a huge percentage more of the population turn vegetarian, which is in itself good for the planet. Because I'm not going to eat hormone injected beef or chlorine washed chicken. So yeah, more and more people, I guess, will turn to locally sourced organic vegetarian products, which is probably a good thing. But you know, these are shocking things we shouldn't accept.
No, and I think you're absolutely right. Although I'm constantly concerned about the nature of healthier food in that sense, demanding a completely different lifestyle. You need. It's not just about being able to afford these foods, often are more expensive. It's about having the time and the capacity to be able to then produce these foods yourself, as opposed to bunging them in a microwave and sticking them on a plate and then opening up a can of beer and watching the footy. It's about eating properly, producing properly. And I think that's a whole skill set that we need a radical overhaul within our society. We need to almost go back to pre-industrial in terms of being able to identify foods ourselves, identify, you know, herbs ourselves, whatever, but then being able to bring them together and creating a healthy concoction of food, even if it takes, you know, an hour or so. And then we sit down with that meal, we sit down with the people, and we engage ourselves, and we don't just stare at the box in the corner. It's actually about a much richer experience, a richer essence, if you like, to our lives. But I fear, unfortunately, Tom, that within our class-based system, there are so many people who just wouldn't be able to take that seriously on a whole number of levels.